So let's talk a little bit about organizing our stories because it's going to be important for us to have some sort of organizational structure. So with anything, we want to kind of look back to our mentor text and think about how did they organize. So here I have the Serena Williams mentor text up, and you see she starts right in with the anecdote. I consider myself fortunate. She uses that really short sentence at the top. That's one little paragraph, which is kind of like that hook inviting us into the story. So she talks about what happened with her personally, and then she transitions and says, if it wasn't for professional care, I wouldn't be here today, according to the Centers of Disease Control. So then she goes into very heavily like informative stats, statistics, where she kind of links other sites and tells us, did you know this? According to UNICEF, she has several things kind of going on in this middle part. But then she kind of goes out into like these rhetorical questions onto like, but what if we did this? Where was this? Where was that? And then she says, it's possible, right? How? And then she goes into the kind of this call to action. And I know we typically think call to action and kind of argumentative, but information also has kind of an argument factor in it. And if you remember in the techniques and goals, it has that kind of call to action. So at the end, she says, how well you can demand governments, businesses, and healthcare providers do more. You can donate. And at the end, she kind of says together, we, that rhetorical, like bringing us all in, we can be the change. So if you notice, I've kind of done just like a quick sketch note of like, what is her organizational structure? She has her story. Then she has her facts and statistics. Then it kind of connects to a bigger worldview of like, what can we do with everyone with this? Not just me and my story, but how does this affect the world? And then 4, kind of this call to action. So that is one way. And I think it's the easiest way to structure the story. It's the way I've been doing in my example, but there are others. So in the video game story on how people cope with disabilities, it starts out with a story, right? We have Jackson Reese here, like a profile. And this is when I say it doesn't have to be you, maybe someone close to you. Maybe you're talking about a sister or a friend or an aunt or someone in your neighborhood where you're kind of experiencing it through their eyes. So maybe you're profiling a person here. But then they go right into this short, it's like what, the third sentence, 1, 2, 3 down. In the United States, 1 of 4 people. So they go story, statistic. But then they go back to story. It's my escape, said Brian Wheatley McDonald. So they have a new story that they add. And then they go back to more information. So it's this kind of switch of like story, information, story, information, story, information. And so it is kind of a back and forth, which is different. And then at the end, instead of necessarily having like a huge call to action, it's more like they're wanting more to give us this information to perhaps make us think about this differently, right? They go back to the story with Reese. And then they say, now with streaming and videos, he says he can put himself out there again. Remember, just like the introduction and conclusion want to kind of match and that snake eating its tail, it's doing it here where you start with that story, you end with that story, right? And we end with his voice saying, gaming helped me coping with being social again. So there's not a call to action. There's nothing we have to do necessarily, but with this information, perhaps we can think about video games in a new and different way. So these are, let me show you the sketch note here. So with this video game story, it's kind of the story or anecdote. Then they give us kind of those numbers or statistics. Then they bring in a second story. Then they connect those 2 stories together. They give us more information data. Then they go back to the story and kind of conclude with like leaving us with these final thoughts. So this is a more, I would say, complex way and more difficult way to write, but some of you guys are so ready for this. So please challenge yourself. Maybe you start with the simple organization of Serena Williams and then you move into this more complex one. But regardless, I think it's really helpful to kind of see the differences in organization because not everyone writes the same, and that's absolutely okay. So think about what would work best for your storyline and which organizational structure you would like, and play around with it a little and see which one looks better. Students always ask me, well, which one do you think is better? Well, I mean, I can tell you, but you play with it. Try one and then try another. That's the beauty of kind of like Google Docs is you can cut and paste and figure things out. So if you want to have both in there and like kind of look at both of them, absolutely do that. But we want to make sure that our writing is clear to our audience. And so that's part of organization.